Millions of papers are printed every day. You can read about what happens when it happens. In the 18th century, it wasn't so easy to find out what was going on. So how did a German inventor start a printing revolution that brought the news to everyone? In the early 1800s, the presses themselves were still operated by hand. How could this tiring and time-consuming process be speeded up? The answer came from Germany, from an engineering genius born near Leipzig in 1774. His name was Friedrich Koenig. Aged just 16, Koenig had been forced to work as a printer's apprentice in Leipzig because his father's early death had left his family very short of money. Spending day after day doing the back-breaking labor of manual printing, Koenig fantasized that there must be a better way. Koenig's genius was to imagine that perhaps steam power could drive a printing press. But to do that, he would have to design a completely new machine, unlike any printing press ever built before. In 1803, Koenig made this, his first prototype. He didn't have the money to make it out of metal, so he made it out of wood. But wood is much too soft to be used in a printing machine. Koenig realized that the only realistic way to build a steam-driven press was to make its frame out of metal. But to do that, Koenig was going to need a serious amount of cash. In 1806, frustrated at the lack of support on the continent, Koenig sailed to England. At that time, England was the most technologically advanced country in the world. Its textile factories and mines were already mechanized. Over in England, a technical revolution was already underway. And in 1807, just 4 months after he had arrived, Koenig found money for his ideas. Thomas Bensley, London's most prominent printer, saw the potential of Koenig's idea and agreed to fund him. Koenig's plan to build a mechanical printing press was back in action. But although he was a genius when it came to inventions on paper, he had only built a wooden prototype. What he needed was someone who could build a working machine. In 1809, he met Andreas Bauer, a precision instrument maker from Stuttgart. He was a master engineer who could bring Koenig's inventions to life. The partnership of Koenig and Bauer had begun. And this is what Koenig and Bauer together managed to build. This is the prototype of every modern printing press. This is Koenig's major breakthrough. Instead of putting the paper on a flat press, on his machine, you put the paper on a rotating cylinder. Now this makes printing much faster. Printing on this machine is a continuous process. Metal type on this block travels back and forth under these cylinders. Ink is picked up in the middle. One print is made here, one print there. This machine can make up to 1,100 prints per hour. That's 5 times better than can ever be managed on a manual press. In 1812, Koenig put on a demonstration of his machine. One of the people who came to see it was the man who printed the Times newspaper, John Walter. Walter ordered 2 machines to be built, but he did it all in secret. He was worried that if the printers in his factory found out, they would be afraid of losing their jobs, and there would be a riot. On the night of the 28th of November, 1814, John Walter, publisher of the Times, told his printers on the hand presses that he was waiting for important news from the continent and that the paper would be delayed. Now, secretly, he was already printing the newspaper using Koenig's machines he had set up nearby. That night, While the workers twiddled their thumbs, Walter watched the steam presses churn out copies of the Times. Suddenly, at 6 in the morning, the publisher rushed in, saying the Times had already been printed by steam power. This is the Times, the original Times of that day. And the publisher wrote, "Our journal of this day presents to the public the practical result of the greatest improvement connected with printing since the discovery of the art itself." Walters was ecstatic. He could print far more copies of his paper with far fewer men. Koenig's machines had made printing history. But clever though it was, Koenig's machine was just the beginning. One even more spectacular invention was needed before the printing revolution was complete. In 1814, the London Times was the first newspaper ever to be printed with a mechanized press. But after this initial success, the inventors of the press, Friedrich Koenig and Andreas Bauer, had a huge row with their financier, Thomas Bensley. Bensley wanted Koenig and Bauer to only make presses for him. Koenig and Bauer were furious at this restriction, and they headed back to Germany. Here they hoped to set up a factory to make presses they could sell to everyone. In Bavaria at that time was rural with no industry. Everything had to be shipped over from England: tools, pig iron, coal and machinery. It often took months to arrive. Koenig and Bauer did survive those early difficult years. It's now a big international company. In the early days, there were no engineers, no mechanics, simply because no one had ever built a machine before. So, Koenig and Bauer trained its own engineers. By 1830, business was booming and the company employed 120 staff. Koenig and Bauer presses were carried sometimes across mountains on the backs of mules to places as far away as Madrid and Paris. The result was that for the first time newspapers became really cheap. This one, Le Petit Journal, sold for just 5 centimes and was the first in the world to have a circulation of 1 million.